Hello, okay, for those of you returning to the channel, welcome back, and for those of you that are new here, that have just stumbled upon this video, then thank you for joining me. And here is my spoiler-free review of 28 Years Later, the third installment in the 28 Days Later franchise, and one of my anticipated movies of the year. I have been really looking forward to this movie. I'm a massive fan of the original film, 28 Days Later. I also really like 28 Weeks Later, but it's been years since I've watched that movie. I just remember being pleasantly surprised by its sequel. At the time, I remember referring to its sequel, 28 Weeks Later, as being the aliens in the 28 Days Later franchise. It kind of had that vibe to it. And you've got the original three collaborators here returning, with Danny Boyle directing, Alex Garland writing, and Anthony Dodd Mantle as the cinematographer. Those original three collaborators returning here alone is just enough to get me really fucking hyped for this movie. So the story is set decades after the rage virus devastated the UK. A small group of survivors has carved out an existence on Lindisfarne, a remote tidal island. Their fragile peace is broken when one member leaves the island and ventures onto the mainland. So I've been waiting for this movie for years. Like I said, absolutely adore that original movie back in 2001, and 28 Weeks Later was a pleasant surprise. But again, I haven't seen that movie in years. I just remember really enjoying it. And so I've been waiting for so long, and to have, you know, Danny Boyle and Alex Garland and the original cinematographer to return here, it's like a dream come true. So, did the film live up to its hype? You know, you had those fantastic trailers. I think the trailers, especially the first one, that very first teaser trailer, was phenomenal. So does it live up to expectations? Does it live up to the hype? Okay, so the opening scene in this movie, for me, was incredible. But incredible in a way that evokes all the right emotions and just throws you back into this story and back into this world in a way that is incredibly visceral and immersive. And I just feel like what they do with this movie from a visual perspective and with its themes was meticulously done. Like, it was beautiful in how sort of the themes and how this story was told through a visual perspective, through the cinematography. And just to use this, I'm going to use the opening scene as an example here, because what the opening scene does is set off this chain of events that plays a major part sort of within the themes that they are exploring within this story. And one of those major themes, or one of the main themes being, is the corruption of innocence. And this is horrifically and effectively brought to life within the opening scene. You know, you've got the Teletubbies. It's in the trailers where you've got these kids watching the Teletubbies, and you've got this, you know, the innocence with the children, and then the horror with the infected coming into the house. And it is incredibly unsettling. It's very disturbing. But it is, you know, for me, it was the catalyst, really, of what it was they were aiming or setting out to explore you with the characters' stories, with its themes, and just how that sort of the corruption of innocence is brought to life from a visual perspective, as well as the performances from the child actors, as well as the adults within this scene. It was just incredibly effective. It was very unnerving, but it's also a moment from a visual perspective, like with the Teletubbies, for example, that then is mirrored or echoed within the final moments of this movie, that for me really did work. And what I mean by beautiful, you know, I just mean from a story perspective, just from sort of the way in which sort of these stories with these characters sort of comes to sort of its conclusion by the end of this movie. and how you've got this kind of very sort of unsettling and disturbing sort of rhyme to it all, where it opens with a scene of, you know, pure innocence being corrupted, and then ends with a, you know, the moment where it kind of leaves you, again, it gets under the skin, it's unsettling. And, you know, I can only guess that the direction of this story going into the next two parts, it's going to go into some quite, I would guess or assume, some really dark places. Like, this is already a dark, you know, story. It's already a dark experience. But sort of really kind of what they're going to be doing, I would assume, just from the way in which the movie ends, is kind of really tap into sort of the darkness of what we are capable as humans. You know, sort of really kind of dig deeper into the sort of the primal instincts that lie beneath the surface of humanity, you know, those, and that again, sort of that kind of the primal aspect of us as humanity. I mean, that is brought to life here through the infected, you know, sort of the story of this group or clan of infected that we follow through this story. And that is almost like an echo or a reflection of us, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, back when we were just sort of, you know, back to the caveman days, and just how that sort of plays alongside sort of our main character's story with our son and father going on this sort of, you know, this hunt as part of this sort of coming of age ritual. It's a very tight, clever and smart experience, from the writing to the way in which this story is told, how you've kind of got these three different sort of stories, where you've got the sort of the relationship between the father and the son, the relationship between the mother and the son, and then you have these infected, this sort of clan of infected that are led by this Alpha. The Alpha being this sort of mutated variant of the infected. He's much more powerful, and how those stories sort of play out alongside each other, I just thought was incredibly effective. It added so much depth to this experience, and just so many layers to this experience, and it all really worked. It worked very effectively for me. And then the story is aided by all of the performances, like Aaron Taylor-Johnson as the father to Spike. I mean, he's great here. Alfie Williams, who plays Spike, he's incredible. Like, for a child actor, his performance was incredible. It felt real, it felt authentic, it felt natural, and it all aids in this kind of very emotional journey that the character is on. And then you've also got Jodie Comer, who plays Isla, the mother here, and again, an incredibly raw and emotional performance. And I just love how this movie, like, going back to from a visual perspective, I just love how this movie was shot. They designed this new rig, so when you get these moments where, for example, the infected are being killed or being shot with an arrow, the moment of impact is shot through these multiple cameras. And as a result of shooting these moments, you know, with these multiple cameras, as well as throughout the film where you'll have different types of camera, like the iPhone is used, it just adds to the immersion of this experience. It adds to the grittiness and sort of that kind of very visceral feeling of this story. It adds to the authenticity of it. One of the things that I felt like they did a really good job at achieving through the visuals and through the way in which the film is shot, through sort of these different cameras like the iPhones, and just sort of how they set up these rigs where this camera, you know, you would sort of get different shots of a certain moment. It kind of, what it did for me was kind of in many ways capture what these characters would be feeling within that moment. I think that's something that Danny Boyle is really clever at doing. He's very smart at doing, is kind of really, from a visual perspective, capturing sort of kind of those very raw emotions that a character would be feeling within that moment. And that's what I felt like these camera setups and just sort of how they shot these certain moments, you know, with these rigs, with these multiple cameras. I felt like that's what they achieved. They achieved the intensity of what a character would be feeling emotionally in that moment. And I think Danny Boyle is fucking amazing at achieving that. You know, along with cinematographer Anthony Mantle, you know, they just very effective at bringing that to life, and it's just what allows this movie, as well as with 28 Days Later, it's what sort of really kind of brings that, the grittiness and the authenticity and sort of that kind of the visceral feeling of this experience to life. And so, yeah, to just go back to sort of the third act and how the story concludes, it's not going to be for everyone, and I can see why it hasn't worked, you know, for a lot of people, and just the movie as a whole, maybe. I mean, it hasn't worked for everyone. A lot of people have said, you know, a lot of fans of the original two movies, you know, there is disappointment out there. But for me, this was almost perfect. I just adored what Danny Boyle and Alex Garland here set out to achieve, and I think they were very effective at giving us something, a continuation of a story within the zombie genre. I mean, they're not zombies really, you know, they're infected, but, you know, within sort of this genre of horror that feels fresh, that feels different, that has depth to it. And, you know, it's not just another movie with people running away from infected or just running away from zombies. It's a movie that kind of really sort of dives deep into sort of the dark depths of, you know, humanity and sort of what we are capable of, and sort of, you know, how we would react, or how we do react with grief and trauma, you know, and sort of really kind of tapping into sort of the more primal aspects that sort of lie beneath humanity. I just think that is just something that they're very effective at bringing to life here. And, you know, yes, they could have just given us 2 hours of what we are already familiar with and sort of really kind of feed into sort of our expectations and wants and desires. But what they do here is subvert expectations, and I think they do a damn good job at it. Yes, at first, you know, that final couple of minutes, I'm looking at the screen and my initial reaction was, what the fuck? That, you know, I was like, what? And then as it plays out, and, you know, I'm not going to say too much here because this is spoiler free. Maybe I'll do a spoiler filled review one day, but when you get sort of the introduction of this other character and he introduces himself, and then again going back to sort of the visual perspective and how this moment kind of echoes what we are introduced to in the opening scene, I was just like, whoa. It was clever, it was smart, and it worked, and it is something that, you know, we don't know where they're going to go with the story, but by just how this movie ends, it's, you know, it's potentially going to go into some really darker places even. You know, it's an experience, it's a story that does something very similar to what the first movie did. You know, where you've got Cillian Murphy's character at the end in the house, a fucking brilliant scene, by the way. I absolutely adore the soundtrack within that movie, but especially that moment. And In a Heartbeat, I think it's called, from the top of my head, by Ryan Murphy. But you got Cillian Murphy, and in that moment, in the third act, he becomes a reflection of what the rage virus is. And I just feel like they expand upon that. They expand on what they were exploring and touching on with that first movie, and just really open it up here within 20 years later. They expand on it. They not only expand on sort of the lore, but they expand on what they are, or what they started to explore with sort of the human aspect, and sort of kind of how that kind of mirrors sort of our more primal instincts, and how that kind of mirrors sort of what is happening with the infected. And then talking about music, you've got a great score here by Young Fathers. I believe they're a Scottish band. I've never heard of them before. But they do a really good job here with the music, and kind of really add into sort of the immersion and kind of that kind of visceral feeling of this story, and sort of the grit, and kind of just, yeah, bringing that kind of the human element to life through its music, and capturing sort of the horror, the grief, the trauma. Fantastic score. I'm going to have to get it on vinyl. I just think they do a really good job in many ways at honouring sort of Ryan Murphy's score from the original movie as well. In fact, in many ways, it felt or sounded like a Ryan Murphy score. But no, a fantastic job by young fathers here in bringing this music, the score to life. When I come out to this movie, I knew I liked it a lot. Like, I really fucking liked it. Yes, it subverts expectations, it does things, that you wouldn't expect, but for me personally, it really did work. And it was an experience that I came out of and I was like, wow, it put me on a, sort of this kind of journey of different emotions, an array of emotions that I experienced throughout. And I was just captivated by what they did. And I think they were very clever with giving us a horror movie within sort of the zombie genre. You have it feel different, have it feel fresh, and have it feel original. It's not just another sequel. This warrants a reason to exist. It has a reason to exist because of what they're exploring with its story and how effective they are at immersing you into it. I completely get why it's not going to work for everyone. You've got a very big horror movie here coming out, and it's not a Hollywood film. It's a British film directed by a British director, British writer, a British composer, a British cinematographer. This is a very British movie, and that is felt throughout. This is not, it doesn't feel like a Hollywood horror movie. It's very much British. And I absolutely adored that aspect of it because there's just, it kind of adds, due to the way, due to the way in which the story is written, to the way it's directed, to how it captures sort of the British countryside and landscape. It's got that very British essence to it, and it all adds to kind of the authenticity and grit of the experience. And just right up until that bonkers ended, that bonkers conclusion, it still felt right. It worked, I felt, for what they'd sort of started with or set out when it, right from those kind of opening moments, the very opening sort of minutes of this movie, it worked. And so I get why it might not have worked for everyone, but for me, I loved this movie. I loved it. At first, I wasn't quite sure. Like, I was virgin on love, but I sort of there was just such a mix of emotions while watching this movie. I just had to really sort of sit down and have a think about what it was that I'd experienced. And then it was like, yeah, I fucking loved this movie. It was everything that I felt like. It might not have been what I was expecting or maybe desiring, but it was very effective. And so yeah, look, enough rambling on from me. They are my spoiler-free thoughts on 28 Years Later. I highly recommend it, and I will be giving 28 Years Later my thoughts on 28 Years Later. But what did you guys think? Are you a fan of those first two movies? Let me know below and let's get a discussion going. And if you've made it this far into the video, then thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And if you want to watch future movie reviews, I'm just some random Welsh geek rambling on, then please hit the subscribe button. It will mean an awful lot to me. I am hoping to catch How to Train Your Dragon, the live action adaptation, next. And I just want to say another massive thank you to everyone that has supported the channel, whether it be subscribing, liking, commenting. It means the world to me. It will always overwhelm me that so many of you do want to follow just some random Welsh geek ramble on about film and TV. My subscriber count is climbing still. I'm currently sat at 509 subscribers. My next big major milestone will be 1,000. Hopefully I would like to hit 1,000 before the new year. But yeah, thanks everyone for watching. Thanks everyone for the support. And that's it from me for now. Thank you all for watching, and I'll be catching you guys soon.